The golden rays of sunset bathed the city in a warm hue, the perfect backdrop for the luxurious rooftop lounge where Enrique and his friends gathered. The laughter and clinking of crystal glasses reverberated across the terrace, a testament to the carefree indulgence of the wealthy. Enrique, a 32-year-old CEO who thrived on challenges, leaned back in his chair, savoring the burn of his whiskey. The skyline reflected in his piercing gaze spoke of conquest, ambition, and untouchable confidence. "You've got everything, Enrique," Caleb drawled, his voice dripping with both admiration and envy. He leaned forward, his smirk daring, his eyes sparkling with the thrill of provocation. "Wealth, power, women. You make winning look easy." Enrique raised an eyebrow, intrigued by the tone. "Go on, Caleb. What's the punchline?" "Well," Caleb continued, gesturing toward the bustling city streets below, "I think I've found something you can't win." The group's attention shifted, the air crackling with curiosity. Enrique leaned forward slightly, his trademark smirk playing on his lips. "I'm listening." Caleb's gaze drifted toward the McDonald's across the street. Through the restaurant's large windows, the fluorescent lights illuminated a young waitress weaving between tables, clearing trays with brisk efficiency. Her uniform bore the marks of a long day, slightly wrinkled, a stray thread here and there, but she moved with purpose, her ponytail bouncing with each step. "Her," Caleb declared, pointing at the waitress. Enrique followed Caleb's line of sight, narrowing his eyes at the woman in question. "The waitress?" "Yes," Caleb replied, leaning back with the satisfaction of someone who had set a perfect trap. "You couldn't win her over, let alone marry her." The group burst into laughter, but Enrique's smirk remained. He studied the waitress for a moment longer. There was something different about her. Unlike the polished, eager women in his social circles, this woman seemed untouchable. She was too absorbed in her work to notice the world watching her, exuding a quiet strength that Enrique found oddly compelling. "What's the bet?" Enrique asked, his voice calm but sharp. "2 million reis," Caleb declared, his grin widening. "You have to win her heart, marry her, no contracts, no games. Just you and her, for real." Enrique chuckled, swirling the whiskey in his glass. 2 million. That's pocket change. "So, it's about the challenge, then?" Caleb goaded. "Exactly." Enrique raised his glass, the golden liquid catching the light. "Get your check ready, Caleb. I'm going to win." As his friends erupted into laughter and cheers, Enrique's mind was already racing. The bet wasn't about the money. It never was. For Enrique, life was a series of challenges to conquer, and this would be no different. The following evening, the smell of grease and fries greeted Enrique as he stepped into the McDonald's. The stark contrast between his tailored suit and the casual, bustling atmosphere drew curious glances from customers and employees alike. Enrique barely noticed. His focus was entirely on the woman behind the counter. Livia moved with practiced precision, her ponytail swaying as she passed from table to table, clearing trays and wiping surfaces. She barely glanced at Enrique, her focus on the tasks at hand. "Excuse me," Enrique said, stepping into her path. She stopped, balancing a tray of used cups and napkins. "Can I help you?" Her tone was polite, but detached. Enrique noted the faint dark circles under her eyes and the weary resilience in her posture. "I'm Enrique," he said, flashing a charming smile. "I thought I'd introduce myself." Livia blinked, clearly unimpressed. "Okay, do you need something? Or are you just here to talk?" Enrique chuckled, taken aback by her bluntness. Most women fell easily for his polished charisma, but Livia was different. "A little of both, maybe," he replied. "I thought we could grab a coffee sometime." Livia arched an eyebrow. "I'm working." "Fair enough," Enrique said, "but persistence is one of my strong suits. I'll ask again when you're not busy." She didn't respond, walking past him to dispose of the trash on her tray. Enrique watched her retreat, intrigued. Livia wasn't like the women he usually pursued, and her indifference only made her more appealing. Over the next week, Enrique became a regular at the McDonald's. Sometimes he ordered coffee, other times he simply lingered, observing Livia as she worked. She began to notice his consistent presence, though she made no effort to engage with him. On the fifth evening, Enrique seized his chance. Livia was restocking napkins near the condiment station when he approached. "Still working hard, I see," he said casually. She glanced at him, her expression skeptical. "Why are you here every day?" Enrique shrugged. "Maybe I like the coffee, or maybe you're bored," Livia countered, crossing her arms. Enrique laughed. "You're sharp. I like that about you." Livia rolled her eyes, but a faint smile tugged at her lips. "Look, I don't know what you're after, but I have a son to take care of. I don't have time for games." Enrique's smile faltered for a moment. "I'm not playing games, Livia. I'm genuinely interested in getting to know you." For the first time, Livia looked at him, really looked at him. There was something earnest in his expression, something that made her pause. But her skepticism quickly returned. "Fine," she said, brushing past him. "But don't expect much." Enrique watched her go, a satisfied smile spreading across his face. This wasn't going to be as easy as he thought, but that only made it more exciting. The late afternoon sun streamed through the wide windows of the McDonald's, casting long shadows over the tables. Livia was finishing her shift, her hands moving deftly as she cleaned the counter. Enrique watched her from his usual seat near the corner, a steaming cup of coffee untouched in front of him. This time, he had a plan, a bold one, but one he hoped would finally win her over. As Livia set the last tray back into its place, Enrique stood and approached her, his polished shoes clicking softly against the tiled floor. She glanced up, her expression a mix of wariness and curiosity. "You again," she said, raising an eyebrow. "Me again," Enrique replied, flashing his practiced smile. "But this time, I'm here for something more important than coffee." Livia sighed, setting the rag down. "What is it now?" Enrique took a deep breath. "Have dinner with me, just once." She tilted her head, her skepticism palpable. "Why?" "Because I want to know you better," Enrique said earnestly. "And I think you deserve a break from all this." He gestured around the restaurant, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly above them. Livia narrowed her eyes, searching his face for any hint of deceit. "Do you think you're doing me a favor?" Enrique shook his head. "No, I think you're doing me one." She paused, the weight of his words catching her off guard. For a moment, she considered rejecting him outright, but something in his tone, an unusual vulnerability, stopped her. "Fine," she said finally, pulling her hair tie loose and letting her ponytail fall. "But only because I'm curious about why someone like you keeps showing up here." Enrique grinned, but Livia quickly held up a hand. "One condition. This isn't some fancy restaurant thing. I want something simple." "Deal," Enrique said, relieved. "I'll pick you up tomorrow night at 7. Don't be late," Livia said, turning away to finish cleaning. The following evening, Enrique arrived at Livia's small apartment in a sleek black car. She stepped outside wearing a modest dress, her hair loose around her shoulders. Enrique couldn't help but smile. "You look great," he said as she slid into the passenger seat. "Thanks," Livia replied, her voice even. She looked around the car's pristine interior. "This is more than I expected for something simple." Enrique chuckled. "Wait until you see where we're going." He drove them to a cozy, family-owned diner on the outskirts of the city. It wasn't extravagant, but it had a warm, welcoming atmosphere. Livia raised an eyebrow as they stepped inside, clearly surprised by his choice. "This is better," she admitted. As they sat down and ordered, the conversation began to flow. Livia opened up about her life, her struggles as a single mother, and her hopes for her son Bruno. Enrique listened intently, captivated by her resilience and honesty. "What about you?" Livia asked, her tone curious but cautious. "Why are you really here? You don't seem like the kind of guy who hangs out at McDonald's." Enrique hesitated, caught off guard by her directness. "Let's just say I needed a change of pace," he said carefully. Livia frowned but didn't press further. She wasn't sure if she believed him, but something about his demeanor seemed genuine. As the night wore on, Enrique found himself drawn to Livia in a way he hadn't expected. The bet that had seemed so simple now felt like an impossible challenge, not because of her resistance, but because of his growing feelings for her. A week after their dinner, Enrique began showing up more frequently, not just at McDonald's, but in Livia's life. He started small, bringing her coffee during her breaks, helping her carry groceries to her apartment, and even spending time with Bruno. At first, Livia was skeptical. She kept her guard up, unsure of Enrique's intentions. But as days turned into weeks, she couldn't deny the effort he was making. Bruno, for his part, adored Enrique. The young boy lit up whenever Enrique arrived, and their bond grew quickly. One Saturday afternoon, Enrique offered to take them both to the park. Livia hesitated, but eventually agreed, thinking it would be good for Bruno. The park was bustling with families enjoying the sunshine. Enrique brought a soccer ball, and Bruno eagerly challenged him to a game. Livia watched from a nearby bench, a small smile tugging at her lips as Enrique and Bruno laughed and ran across the grass. "You're good with him," Livia said when Enrique sat beside her, breathless from playing. Enrique shrugged, wiping sweat from his brow. "He's a great kid. He reminds me of, well, me when I was younger." Livia studied him, her skepticism softening. "Why are you doing all this, Enrique? You barely know us." Enrique met her gaze, his expression serious. "Maybe I want to know you better. Maybe I'm tired of the life I've been living." She didn't respond immediately, her mind racing with questions. Part of her wanted to believe him, but another part couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to his story. As the sun began to set, Enrique drove them home. Bruno fell asleep in the back seat, his head resting against the window. Livia glanced at Enrique, her walls beginning to crack. "Thank you," she said softly. Enrique smiled, his heart warming at her words. "Anytime," but as he dropped them off and drove away, a knot of guilt twisted in his stomach. The bet that had started this all lingered in his mind, a shadow over his growing feelings for Livia and Bruno. For the first time, Enrique began to wonder if he was in over his head and if he could ever truly make things right. The days turned into weeks, and Enrique's presence in Livia's life became more frequent. At first, Livia remained cautious, hesitant to let her guard down. She had been burned before, by promises that turned out to be hollow, and by people who vanished when things got hard. Yet, Enrique's persistence and genuine affection for Bruno were beginning to wear away her walls. One Saturday morning, Enrique showed up unannounced at her apartment, holding a bouquet of sunflowers and a bag of fresh pastries. Livia opened the door, surprised but not entirely displeased. "I thought you could use a little sunshine," he said, holding out the flowers. Livia raised an eyebrow but accepted them. "You're persistent. I'll give you that. Only when it matters," Enrique replied with a smile. He stepped inside, greeted enthusiastically by Bruno, who was clutching a worn soccer ball. "Enrique, can we go play today?" the boy asked, his excitement palpable. Enrique crouched to Bruno's level. "Of course, but only if your mom says it's okay." Livia crossed her arms, pretending to think it over. "I suppose, but don't keep him out too long. And don't spoil him too much." "No promises," Enrique teased, winking at Bruno. The three of them spent the afternoon at the park, laughter filling the air as Enrique and Bruno played an intense game of soccer. Livia watched from a shaded bench, her heart softening at the sight of her son's happiness. When they returned home, Enrique helped Bruno with his homework, patiently explaining math problems that Livia herself struggled with. Watching them, Livia couldn't help but feel a pang of gratitude, and something deeper, something she wasn't ready to name. After Bruno went to bed, Livia and Enrique sat on the small balcony of her apartment, sipping tea and talking about their lives. Enrique shared glimpses of his past, carefully skirting around the truth about the bet. He spoke about his parents, who had passed away when he was young, and how he had thrown himself into work to escape the loneliness. "Do you ever feel like you're chasing something, but you're not sure what it is?" Enrique asked, staring out at the city lights. Livia nodded, her voice soft. every day. But for me, it's not about chasing, it's about surviving. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the weight of their shared vulnerability hung between them. As their connection deepened, Enrique knew he needed to take the next step. The guilt of the bet gnawed at him, but he convinced himself that proposing to Livia would make things right. After all, his feelings for her were real now, weren't they? One evening, Enrique invited Livia and Bruno to dinner at a quiet restaurant on the outskirts of the city. The place was cozy, with soft lighting and a warm ambience that made it feel almost magical. Livia wore a simple yet elegant dress, and Bruno's eyes lit up at the sight of the dessert menu. Midway through the meal, Enrique cleared his throat, his heart pounding. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "Livia," he began, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside him. "I know this might seem sudden, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. You and Bruno have brought something into my world that I didn't even realize I was missing." Livia froze, her eyes widening as Enrique opened the box to reveal a delicate diamond ring. "Will you marry me?" he asked, his gaze earnest. For a long moment, Livia didn't speak. She glanced at Bruno, who was grinning from ear to ear, then back at Enrique. "You're serious?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I've never been more serious," Enrique said. Livia's mind raced. Every instinct told her to be cautious, to protect herself and Bruno. But as she looked into Enrique's eyes, she saw something she hadn't expected: vulnerability. "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Enrique's face lit up, and he slid the ring onto her finger. Bruno clapped excitedly, his joy infectious. For the first time in a long time, Livia allowed herself to hope that happiness might be within reach. The wedding was a small, intimate affair held at a charming chapel near Livia's neighborhood. Bruno served as the ring bearer, beaming with pride as he walked down the aisle. Livia wore a simple white dress, her hair falling in soft waves around her shoulders. Enrique, standing at the altar, felt a mix of emotions he couldn't quite name. This moment, which had started as a game, now felt monumental. He was genuinely happy, yet the shadow of the bet loomed over him. As they exchanged vows, Enrique pushed the guilt aside. He promised himself he would tell Livia the truth, eventually. For now, he would focus on being the man she deserved. The honeymoon phase of Enrique and Livia's marriage was brief but sweet. Livia was slowly adapting to her new reality, having a husband who provided support, companionship, and affection. Bruno adored having Enrique around, and Livia couldn't help but feel moments of gratitude for the life they were building. But deep inside, her cautious nature never fully rested. One evening, while Enrique was out at a business meeting, Livia decided to unpack some of the boxes Enrique had moved into her apartment. She didn't consider herself nosy. She was simply curious about the man she had married. As she sifted through files and papers, she stumbled upon an envelope addressed to Enrique. Inside was a formal-looking letter, and at the bottom of the page, a sentence caught her eye. "Regarding your successful bet with Caleb, congratulations." Livia froze, her heart pounding as her eyes scanned the document. The language was vague, but the implication was clear. Her marriage might not have been born out of genuine love after all. Her thoughts spiraled as she tried to piece together what it meant. Did Enrique marry her for some kind of game? Was this entire relationship a lie? When Enrique returned that night, Livia's demeanor was noticeably colder. She didn't confront him directly. She wasn't ready. But her walls, which had begun to crumble, were building back up, brick by brick. The growing tension between Livia and Enrique came to a head at a dinner party hosted by Enrique's old friends. Livia had reluctantly agreed to attend, despite feeling uneasy about mingling with people who seemed so different from her. The party was held at a lavish penthouse, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of the city. Livia, wearing a simple dress that Enrique had bought for her, felt out of place among the glittering crowd. Enrique stayed close to her side, introducing her to his friends and showering her with compliments. But Livia's unease grew with every passing moment. She couldn't shake the memory of the letter she'd found, nor the gnawing suspicion that there was more to her husband's story than he had let on. The final blow came when Caleb, Enrique's former confidant and the instigator of the bet, approached them with a sly grin. "Well, Enrique," Caleb said, raising his glass, "you really outdid yourself this time. I didn't think you had it in you to win the bet and marry her." The room fell silent. Livia's face drained of color as Caleb's words hung in the air. "What did you say?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Enrique shot Caleb a warning glare, but it was too late. Livia stepped back, her hands trembling. "Is this true?" she demanded, her eyes locking onto Enrique's. Was I part of some kind of game?" Enrique's throat tightened. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. The guilt he had been suppressing for weeks now threatened to consume him. "Yes," he admitted finally, his voice barely audible. "But it's not what you think. It started as a bet, but it's not like that anymore. I love you, Livia. I love Bruno. This is real." Tears welled in Livia's eyes as she shook her head. "I trusted you," she said, her voice breaking. "I let you into my life, into my son's life, and it was all just a game to you." "Not anymore," Enrique pleaded. "Please let me explain." But Livia didn't stay to hear his explanation. She turned and walked out of the party, her heart shattered. Enrique sat alone in his penthouse, the city lights stretching endlessly beyond the glass walls. The space felt emptier than ever, despite its opulence. The silence was deafening, broken only by the clink of his whiskey glass against the table as he set it down. The image of Livia's tear-streaked face haunted him. The pain in her eyes had been like a knife to his chest, sharper than anything he'd ever experienced. He had spent years building walls around himself, shielding his emotions with wealth, power, and charm. But Livia had dismantled those defenses, and now her absence left him exposed. His phone buzzed on the table. It was Caleb. Enrique stared at the screen, his jaw tightening. Finally, he picked up, his voice icy. "What do you want?" "I was just checking in," Caleb said, his tone smug. "Rough night." Enrique's grip on the phone tightened. "You ruined everything." "That was my life you decided to joke about." Caleb laughed. "Your life? Come on, Enrique. You knew what this was from the beginning. Don't act like a saint now." Enrique hung up, tossing the phone aside. Caleb's words echoed in his mind, but they only strengthened his resolve. He had made a terrible mistake, but he wasn't going to let Caleb or his past define him anymore. He needed to fix this. Livia woke up to the sound of Bruno playing in the living room. She had barely slept, her mind replaying the events of the previous night over and over. Enrique's betrayal felt like a fresh wound, one that she wasn't sure would ever heal. "Mom, can we go to the park today?" Bruno asked, running into her room with his soccer ball. Livia forced a smile. "Maybe later, sweetheart. Let me finish some work first." Bruno nodded, his cheerful energy unshaken. He had been asking about Enrique, and each time, Livia struggled to find the right words. Later that afternoon, as Livia was folding laundry, there was a knock at the door. She opened it cautiously, her heart sinking when she saw Enrique standing there with a bouquet of sunflowers, her favorite. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice cold. "To talk," Enrique said. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed the turmoil within. "Please, Livia, just hear me out." Livia hesitated, her anger battling with the part of her that still remembered how much Bruno loved Enrique, and how, despite everything, she had started to love him too. "5 minutes," she said, stepping aside. Enrique entered, glancing around the small apartment that had once felt so warm and welcoming. Now, it seemed to reject him as much as Livia did. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," he began, setting the flowers on the table. "But I need you to know that everything I've done these past few months, getting to know you, spending time with Bruno, it was real. I didn't expect to fall in love with you, Livia, but I did." Livia crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. "And the bet, was that real too?" Enrique flinched. Yes. It started as a bet, but it stopped being about that a long time ago. I know I hurt you, and I'll do whatever it takes to make it right. You can't undo what you've done, Livia said, her voice trembling. You used me. You used my son. How am I supposed to trust you after that? Enrique took a deep breath. I don't expect you to trust me right away. But I'm not giving up on us, Livia. You and Bruno mean everything to me. I'll prove it to you, even if it takes the rest of my life. For a moment, they stood in silence, the weight of his words hanging between them. Livia looked away, her emotions warring within her. She wanted to believe him, but her fear of being hurt again was too strong. You should go, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Enrique nodded, his heart sinking. I'll leave, he said, but I'll come back, and I'll keep coming back until I've earned your forgiveness. As the door closed behind him, Livia sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. She didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain: her life would never be the same. Enrique's determination to earn Livia's forgiveness began with small, deliberate actions. He knew that words alone wouldn't rebuild the trust he had shattered. Each day, he found ways to show Livia and Bruno that he was serious about becoming part of their lives, not for a bet, but because he truly cared. It started with Bruno. Enrique volunteered to help at Bruno's school, assisting with a fundraiser for new playground equipment. He spent hours organizing games, setting up booths, and engaging with the children. When Livia arrived to pick up Bruno and saw Enrique surrounded by a group of laughing kids, something in her heart softened. Did you see Enrique at the school today, Mom? Bruno asked excitedly over dinner that evening. He helped me win a prize in the ring toss. Livia forced a smile, unsure how to respond. She couldn't deny that Enrique was making an effort, but the memory of his betrayal lingered. The following weekend, Enrique invited Livia and Bruno to a community event he had sponsored, a charity soccer match benefiting single-parent families. Livia hesitated, but Bruno's enthusiasm convinced her to attend. The event was lively, with music, food stalls, and families cheering from the sidelines. Enrique greeted them at the entrance, his smile tentative but hopeful. Thank you for coming, he said, looking directly at Livia. We're here for Bruno, she replied, her tone neutral. Bruno quickly joined a group of kids on the field, leaving Enrique and Livia to watch from the sidelines. I wanted to tell you something, Enrique began, his voice low. I've been working with a few organizations to create scholarships for single parents. I named one of them after your mother. Livia turned to him, her eyes widening in surprise. Why would you do that? Because she raised an incredible woman, Enrique said simply. Livia's gaze softened, but she quickly looked away. You can't just fix things with grand gestures, Enrique. I know, he said, but I can try to show you that I've changed, that I'm not the man who made that bet. As the soccer match ended and families began to leave, Bruno ran up to them, holding a small trophy he'd won. Look, Mom, Enrique said I played great. Livia smiled at her son's joy, but her thoughts remained conflicted. Enrique was trying, that much was clear, but could she let herself believe in him again? Enrique's old life was becoming a distant memory. The glamorous parties, the superficial friendships, and the constant pursuit of status no longer held the same appeal. He had severed ties with most of his social circle, including Caleb. One evening, Caleb showed up at Enrique's office, uninvited. He strolled in as if nothing had changed, leaning casually against Enrique's desk. You've gone soft, Caleb said with a smirk. All this charity work and family stuff. It's not you? Enrique didn't look up from his papers. You don't know me as well as you think, Caleb. I know you're wasting your time, Caleb continued. That woman is never going to forgive you. And even if she does, she's not worth throwing away everything we built. Enrique stood, his expression cold. What we built was empty. It was all about ego and games. I don't want that life anymore. Caleb laughed, shaking his head. You've really changed, haven't you? Well, good luck with your little redemption arc. Just don't come crying to me when it falls apart. As Caleb walked out, Enrique felt a sense of finality. He had chosen his path, and there was no turning back. Later that night, Enrique arrived at Livia's apartment with a bouquet of sunflowers and a humble request. "I know I've hurt you," he said, standing in the doorway. "And I know I have a long way to go, but I'm not giving up. I want to be the man you and Bruno deserve." Livia studied him for a long moment, her emotions warring within her. Finally, she stepped aside, allowing him in. "You can stay for dinner," she said quietly. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. Enrique's persistence was slowly chipping away at Livia's walls, but she was still guarded. She couldn't forget the betrayal, but watching him change so profoundly was harder to ignore. One morning, Livia woke to find a letter in her mailbox. It was addressed to her from Enrique, and inside was a carefully handwritten note. "Livia, I've learned that actions speak louder than words, and I want you to see who I am becoming. Not for anyone else, but for you and Bruno. Today, I've made a commitment to support the community that you care about so much. You'll find the details at the school this afternoon." Curious but skeptical, Livia decided to check out the event Enrique had mentioned. When she arrived at the school, she was greeted by teachers, parents, and children buzzing with excitement. At the center of the activity stood Enrique, speaking with a group of parents about the new scholarship program he had funded. As Livia approached, Enrique looked up and smiled. "I'm glad you came," he said, his tone genuine. "What's all this?" she asked, gesturing to the banners and tables. Enrique explained that the scholarship program was designed to help single parents return to school or learn new skills to provide better opportunities for their families. "It's named after my mother," he added softly. "She raised me alone, and I know how much she sacrificed for me. I wanted to honor her. And you?" Livia was speechless. The gesture was thoughtful and deeply personal, and it was clear Enrique had poured his heart into it. As the event continued, Livia saw the gratitude on the faces of the parents and the excitement of the children. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that Enrique's change might be real. That evening, Bruno noticed the change in his mother's demeanor. She wasn't as tense or distant as she had been in recent weeks, and her smile came a little more easily. "Mom," Bruno said as they sat at the dinner table, "do you like Enrique?" Livia froze, caught off guard by the question. "Why do you ask, honey?" "Because I like him," Bruno said simply. "He makes me laugh, and he's always nice to you. I think he wants to make us happy." Livia sighed, running a hand through her hair. "It's complicated, Bruno. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, and it's hard to know if they've really changed." Bruno frowned, his young mind trying to make sense of her words. "But if he's trying, doesn't that mean he cares?" Livia looked at her son, her heart heavy. His innocence was both a blessing and a burden. She didn't want to disappoint him, but she also couldn't let herself be hurt again. The next day, Enrique arrived unexpectedly, holding a kite and wearing a hopeful smile. "I thought Bruno might like to try flying this," he said. Bruno's face lit up, and Livia couldn't bring herself to say no. They spent the afternoon at the park, running through the open fields as the kite soared high above them. Enrique's laughter mingled with Bruno's, and Livia found herself smiling despite her reservations. As they walked home, Bruno ran ahead, leaving Livia and Enrique to talk. "Thank you for today," she said, her tone cautious but sincere. Enrique glanced at her, his expression earnest. "You don't have to thank me. I'm here because I want to be for both of you." Livia looked away, her emotions swirling. She wanted to trust him, but the fear of being hurt again held her back. That night, as she tucked Bruno into bed, he whispered, "Mom, I think Enrique loves us. Maybe you could love him too." Livia's heart ached at her son's words. She didn't know if she was ready to forgive, but Bruno's faith in Enrique was unwavering, and that made her wonder, could she find it in herself to try? The sun was bright and the sky cloudless as Enrique picked up Livia and Bruno for a planned day out. After weeks of cautious interactions and tentative conversations, Livia finally agreed to spend the day with him, thanks to Bruno's relentless enthusiasm. Enrique had arranged a trip to the local botanical gardens, a serene place he thought would let them relax and reconnect. Bruno was thrilled, running ahead on the winding paths lined with vibrant flowers and lush greenery. As they strolled through the gardens, Enrique took the opportunity to open up about his life, sharing stories about his childhood and the loneliness he often felt growing up in a wealthy but emotionally distant household. "My parents were good people," Enrique said, watching Bruno chase butterflies, but they were more focused on appearances than anything else. Everything was about the business, the legacy. Livia listened quietly, her skepticism softening. "That must have been hard," she said after a moment. "Growing up without connection." "It was," Enrique admitted. "That's probably why I became the way I did. So focused on winning, on proving myself. But then I met you and Bruno, and it felt like I was finally seeing what I'd been missing." Livia didn't respond immediately, her mind racing. She wanted to believe his words, but the memory of his betrayal still lingered. They reached a shaded bench near a small pond, and Bruno ran over to show them a flower he had picked. Enrique smiled and ruffled the boy's hair, the gesture so natural that it caught Livia off guard. "Thank you for today," Livia said softly as they watched Bruno skip stones on the water. Enrique turned to her, his gaze earnest. "Thank you for giving me a chance." The day ended with ice cream at a small parlor near the gardens. Bruno fell asleep on the drive home, and as Enrique carried him inside, Livia couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. Just as Livia was beginning to let her guard down, an unexpected visit threatened to shatter the fragile progress they had made. It was late one evening when Caleb showed up at Enrique's office unannounced. His smug grin and condescending tone immediately set Enrique on edge. "What do you want, Caleb?" Enrique asked, his voice cold. "To congratulate you," Caleb said, leaning casually against Enrique's desk. "You've really committed to the whole redemption act. It's almost believable." Enrique clenched his jaw. "This isn't an act. I care about them, about Livia and Bruno." "Sure you do," Caleb replied, his grin widening. "But does she know the whole truth? About how confident you were that you'd win the bet, or how you laughed about it with us afterward?" Enrique stood abruptly, his fists clenched. "Get out." Caleb shrugged, unfazed. "Fine. But if you're so confident in your redemption, maybe Livia should know exactly what kind of man you were." The next day, Caleb made good on his threat. He showed up at Livia's apartment under the pretense of delivering something on Enrique's behalf. Livia, caught off guard, let him in. "I'm surprised you've forgiven Enrique," Caleb said casually as he handed her a small package. "Especially considering everything he told us about the bet." Livia froze. "What do you mean?" "Oh, just the way he bragged about how easy it would be to win you over," Caleb continued, feigning innocence. "You should have heard him at the start. It was all a game to him." Livia's stomach churned as Caleb's words sunk in. She had begun to trust Enrique again, to believe that he had changed. But now, the doubts came rushing back. When Enrique arrived at her apartment that evening, Livia confronted him, her anger barely contained. "Why didn't you tell me everything?" she demanded. "Why didn't you tell me how much of a joke I was to you?" Enrique's face fell. "Livia, it wasn't like that. Don't lie to me," she interrupted, her voice trembling. "Caleb told me everything. You laughed about it, Enrique. You mocked me." Enrique stepped forward, his expression pained. "That was before I knew you, before I understood how wrong I was. I'm not that man anymore." Livia shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "How am I supposed to believe that? How am I supposed to believe anything you say?" Enrique reached out, but Livia stepped back, her voice breaking. "Leave, Enrique. Just leave." As the door closed behind him, Enrique felt the weight of his past mistakes pressing down on him like never before. He had been trying so hard to move forward, but it seemed his past wasn't finished with him yet. Enrique paced his apartment, his mind racing with Caleb's betrayal and Livia's devastation. The weight of his past mistakes loomed over him, threatening to undo every step he had taken to become a better man. He had to act decisively to prove that his transformation was genuine, not with words, but with sacrifices. The next morning, Enrique walked into the boardroom of his company. His executives were already seated, the air thick with anticipation. Enrique took his place at the head of the table, exuding a calm determination that silenced a room. "I've made a decision," Enrique began, his voice steady. "I'm stepping down," as gasps rippled through the room, and several board members exchanged incredulous looks. "Effective immediately, I'll be handing over control to my vice president," Enrique continued. "My focus is no longer on corporate success. I need to dedicate myself to something more meaningful." The announcement sent shockwaves through his circle of colleagues and friends. Many tried to dissuade him, but Enrique remained resolute. He sold off shares of the company to fund his new philanthropic initiatives, including the scholarship program for single parents and community housing projects. For the first time in his life, Enrique felt free, not tied to the expectations of his wealth or reputation. Later that week, Enrique arrived at Livia's apartment. This time, he didn't bring flowers or gifts. He stood on the threshold, unadorned, ready to face her judgment. "I know I've hurt you, Livia," he began, his voice heavy with emotion. "And I know words aren't enough to fix what I've done. That's why I've walked away from the life that made me the person who hurt you. I've left it all behind, because you and Bruno mean more to me than anything else ever could." Livia's expression softened, but her hesitation remained. "Enrique, I don't need you to give up everything. I just need to know that I can trust you again." Enrique nodded. "I know, but I needed to do this for me too. I want to be the kind of man you and Bruno can count on, not the man I was." As Enrique left, Livia's heart ached with conflicting emotions. His actions spoke louder than words, but her fear of being hurt again still lingered. Days turned into weeks, and Livia wrestled with her emotions. She couldn't ignore the changes in Enrique or the impact he had made on Bruno's life. Bruno often asked about him, his innocent faith in Enrique unshaken despite everything. "Do you miss Enrique, Mom?" Bruno asked one evening as they sat on the couch. Livia hesitated, her hands tightening around her mug. "I don't know, Bruno. It's complicated." Bruno tilted his head, his young eyes filled with curiosity. "But he makes us happy, right? And he's trying really hard. Doesn't that mean something?" Livia looked at her son, her heart heavy. She couldn't deny that Enrique had brought joy into their lives. But was that enough to outweigh the pain of his betrayal? The turning point came during a community event at the school. Livia attended reluctantly, knowing Enrique would be there. As she watched him interact with the children and parents, she saw a man who had truly transformed. His smile was no longer polished and practiced. It was genuine, filled with warmth and sincerity. After the event, Enrique approached her cautiously. "Livia," he said softly, "I know I don't deserve it, but I'd like to ask for one last chance. Not for me, for us, for Bruno." Livia studied him, her heart pounding. She thought about the man he had been when they first met, and the man standing before her now. He wasn't perfect, but neither was she. "I'm not saying I forgive you completely," she said finally, "but I'm willing to try. If you promise to never lie to me again." Enrique's face lit up with relief and gratitude. "I promise, Livia. From now on, everything I do is for you and Bruno." The small, sunlit park bustled with families, the sounds of laughter and children's chatter filling the crisp morning air. Enrique stood under a tall oak tree, fidgeting slightly with the velvet box in his pocket. He had been rehearsing this moment in his mind for days, determined to make it right this time. When Livia and Bruno arrived, their smiles lit up the park. Enrique waved, his heart swelling as Bruno ran toward him, holding a small drawing he had made. "Enrique, look," Bruno exclaimed, handing him the paper. It was a crude but heartfelt drawing of the three of them standing together, with the words, "Our family," scrawled at the top. Enrique knelt, taking the boy in his arms. "It's perfect, Bruno. Just like you." Livia approached, her expression a mix of curiosity and cautious warmth. "What's all this about?" she asked, gesturing to the picnic blanket Enrique had set up under the tree. "I wanted to spend the day with the two people who matter most to me," Enrique replied. They shared lunch, laughter, and stories. Enrique kept the conversation light, making Bruno giggle with his stories of mishaps from his childhood. Livia watched them, her heart softening with every moment. As the afternoon sun began to dip, Enrique stood and took a deep breath. "Livia," he began, pulling the velvet box from his pocket, "I know I've hurt you, and I'll spend the rest of my life making up to you. I'm not perfect, but I've changed, and that's because of you and Bruno." He opened the box, revealing a simple but elegant ring. "This time, I'm asking with no lies, no games, and no conditions. Will you marry me? Not because I want to prove something, but because I love you." Livia's breath caught. The sincerity in his eyes was undeniable, and the words she had longed to hear were finally spoken. She glanced at Bruno, whose wide-eyed grin was all the encouragement she needed. "Yes," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "Yes, I'll marry you." Enrique slid the ring onto her finger, and Bruno threw his arms around both of them. The park seemed to hold its breath, the moment etched into their hearts forever. The wedding was a simple, intimate ceremony held in the same park where Enrique had proposed. The oak tree stood as a witness to their vows, its branches swaying gently in the breeze. Livia wore a modest white dress, her hair adorned with wildflowers. Bruno stood proudly as the ring bearer, his grin brighter than the sun. Enrique, in a tailored but understated suit, couldn't take his eyes off Livia as she walked down the aisle. Their vows were heartfelt, a testament to the journey they had shared. Enrique promised honesty and devotion, while Livia vowed to trust and forgive. When the officiant declared them husband and wife, the small gathering of friends and family erupted in applause. Bruno hugged them tightly, his happiness radiating through the crowd. In the weeks that followed, Enrique and Livia settled into their new life as a family. Enrique continued his philanthropic work, expanding his initiatives to support single parents and underprivileged communities. Livia, inspired by his efforts, began volunteering at the programs, using her experiences to help others. Their relationship wasn't perfect. There were moments of doubt, disagreements, and challenges. But they faced them together, committed to building a future based on trust and love. One evening, as they sat on the couch with Bruno asleep between them, Livia leaned her head on Enrique's shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" Enrique asked, his arm wrapping around her. "For not giving up," she said. Enrique smiled, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I'll never stop trying, Livia. You and Bruno are my everything." As the night deepened, the city lights twinkling outside their window, Enrique and Livia held each other close. Their journey had been far from easy, but in that moment, they knew it had all been worth it. Thank you for watching this story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like to show your support. It helps us continue bringing more engaging stories to you. What part of the story had the biggest impact on you? Was it the emotional moments, the unexpected twists, or the powerful themes? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We're also eager to hear your ideas. What kinds of stories would you like to see next? Whether it's about love, betrayal, redemption, or something entirely different, share your suggestions in the comments. Your input could inspire our next story. Thank you for being a part of our storytelling journey. We appreciate your support and look forward to hearing from you.